how avoidants suffer in silence after losing someone who truly loved them. They'll tell you they're fine, they'll smile, stay busy, and convince everyone, even themselves, that they've moved on. But the truth, avoidants don't stop feeling when they lose someone who truly loved them. They just stop showing it. And that silence becomes their punishment. When someone with avoidant tendencies loses a person who genuinely loved them, the world doesn't see the suffering that follows because it's quiet. It happens behind calm faces and long work hours, in distractions that never quite distract enough. They tell themselves, I'm better off alone. But what they're really saying is, I don't know how to feel safe enough to be loved. Avoidants often believe independence is strength, and to a point it is. But when love walks away, their independence becomes isolation. The same walls that once protected them now keep comfort out, and while they appear strong, inside they replay moments, things they wish they'd said, ways they wish they'd softened. But they can't admit it, because to admit it means facing the pain of realizing they pushed away the very thing they craved, connection. Their suffering doesn't come from the breakup itself. It comes from the realization that love requires vulnerability, and that's the one thing they never allowed themselves to give. Healing begins the moment they stop pretending they don't care, the moment they admit that being loved wasn't their weakness, it was their opportunity to grow, because love doesn't disappear when it's lost, it echoes, and sometimes that echo is what finally teaches us the truth. You can't outrun love, you can only learn to let it in. Silence isn't healing, it's hiding. For avoidance, silence becomes the invisible armor they wear after losing someone who truly loved them. On the surface, it looks like composure. They seem calm, collected, even indifferent. They don't lash out or break down. They just disappear. They withdraw into routines, hobbies, or work, convincing everyone, including themselves, that they're okay. But underneath that quiet is a storm of emotions they refuse to acknowledge. The silence they cling to is not peace, it's suppression. It's the mind's way of saying, if I don't talk about it, I won't feel it. Yet feelings don't vanish just because they're unspoken. They linger, waiting for the stillness of the night, the emptiness of a room, or the reminder of a voice they can no longer hear. Avoidants have learned that emotional expression can be dangerous. Somewhere in their past, they picked up the message that vulnerability leads to rejection, that needing someone means being weak, and that love comes with the risk of losing control. So when they lose someone who truly cared, their first instinct is to retreat. They tell themselves silence is strength, that they're better off not talking about what happened. But silence is not strength. It's fear in disguise. It's the mind's way of maintaining control in a situation that feels uncontrollable. By avoiding the conversation, they believe they can avoid the pain. But the irony is, the more they suppress, the deeper that pain seeps into their identity. In that quiet, they replay the relationship in fragments, moments of closeness, arguments they never resolved, words they wish they'd said but didn't. But instead of expressing these feelings, they rationalize them. They convince themselves it wasn't meant to be, that the other person was too emotional, too demanding, too intense. This logical framing gives them temporary relief, but it also keeps them disconnected from the raw grief underneath, because grief is messy, it's unpredictable, and avoidants crave control. Their silence becomes the last piece of control they have left. If they don't talk about it, they can still pretend it doesn't matter, but silence has consequences. Over time, it hardens. What starts as self-protection turns into emotional numbness. The heart that once wanted connection now feels foreign to the idea of it. They become strangers to their own emotions, unable to fully experience joy or pain. The problem isn't that they don't care. It's that caring feels dangerous, so they shrink the range of what they allow themselves to feel. They replace emotional depth with productivity, connection with independence, and conversation with isolation. On the outside, they appear to have moved on, but internally they're stuck in the same emotional loop, unable to process what they've lost because they've never allowed themselves to grieve it. The silence also robs them of understanding. When you don't talk about your pain, you don't get to learn from it. You don't get to see your patterns, your fears, or your triggers clearly. You just repeat them Avoidants often find themselves in a cycle, losing good people, feeling momentary relief, and then wondering months later why they still feel empty. That emptiness isn't the absence of love, it's the absence of expression. The love they pushed away still exists in memory. And without talking about it, without confronting it, that love becomes a ghost that haunts them in quiet moments. Healing doesn't happen in silence. Healing requires honesty, and honesty requires sound. Words spoken, feelings shared, truths faced. But for avoidance, speaking feels like exposure. It means risking rejection, admitting regret, confronting shame. So they stay quiet, hoping time will heal what they refuse to face. Yet time can only heal what we're willing to feel. Silence might protect them from immediate pain, but it also prolongs it. It keeps them living half a life, safe but disconnected. It's a survival strategy that helps them endure heartbreak, but prevents them from ever truly healing it. The wall that once protected them becomes their prison. For avoidance, emotional walls are not built overnight. They are constructed slowly, brick by brick. From every moment they felt unsafe being themselves, every time love felt conditional, every time opening up led to disappointment or rejection, those walls are built out of necessity, not malice. They tell themselves that distance equals safety, that by keeping people at arm's length they can avoid the chaos that comes with emotional vulnerability. And for a while it works. The wall gives them a sense of control. It keeps them from being hurt too deeply, from feeling too much, from needing someone who might not stay. But when someone comes along who truly loves them, someone patient, consistent, willing to see past the walls, that same structure that once kept them safe becomes the very thing that keeps love out. Inside that wall, the avoidant feels a sense of order. They decide when to give affection, when to pull back, when to disappear. It feels powerful, but love doesn't thrive in control, it thrives in connection. When they lose someone who genuinely cared, they are left inside that self-made fortress alone with their thoughts. At first, that solitude feels familiar, even comforting. It's what they know. They tell themselves it's better this way. But as days turn into weeks, the silence inside those walls grows louder. The safety they once found in distance begins to feel suffocating. The same wall that protected them from emotional chaos now traps them in emotional emptiness. They may try to fill that void with distractions, new hobbies, long work hours, maybe even casual relationships that never go too deep, anything to keep from facing the echo of what's missing. Yet nothing feels quite enough, because none of it reaches beyond the barrier they've built. Deep down, they crave closeness, but the fear of being vulnerable keeps them from stepping outside. They want love, but they also fear it. It's a painful paradox. The one thing that could set them free is the very thing they've taught themselves to avoid. The wall keeps them safe from rejection, but it also ensures they'll never experience the fullness of connection again, not until they learn to let it down. Every time they remember the person they lost, they feel a mix of longing and resistance. They might replay moments of tenderness, but just as quickly, they shut those thoughts down with logic. They remind themselves of the reasons it couldn't work, of the ways they felt misunderstood or pressured. It's not that those thoughts are entirely false, but they're incomplete. Beneath the rationalizations lies something raw. The fear of being known and the shame of realizing they never allowed themselves to truly be loved. The wall kept them from being hurt, but it also kept them from being seen. And to be unseen in love is its own kind of suffering. Over time, that wall doesn't just block others out. It blocks the avoidant from their own emotions. The longer they stay behind it, the harder it becomes to tell the difference between safety and loneliness. They become disconnected, not only from people, but from themselves, from joy, tenderness, empathy, even hope. What once felt like emotional strength now reveals itself as isolation. It's a slow realization, one that creeps in during quiet moments when there's no one left to blame and no distraction left to hide behind. They begin to understand that their pain isn't caused by loss alone, but by the barriers they built to keep loss from ever happening again. The wall that once served them well becomes the prison that limits them. It keeps them from risk, yes, but it also keeps them from growth. Love cannot reach through it, and peace cannot exist inside it. They may not even notice how much they've changed until someone kind tries to get close again, and they feel the old reflex to pull away. The wall stands tall and unyielding, protecting them from pain while denying them life. They think it's keeping danger out, but really, it's keeping them in. Regret comes when awareness arrives too late. For avoidance, the realization of what they've lost doesn't hit immediately. In the beginning, there's a sense of relief. The pressure to be emotionally available is gone. The fear of disappointing someone has lifted, and they finally feel back in control. They can breathe again, or so they think. They dive into distractions, telling themselves they're fine, that the relationship wasn't right, that it was better to end things before it got worse. For a while, that logic works. They feel light, detached, even proud of how easily they've moved on. But time has a way of stripping away defenses, and when the noise quiets, regret begins to whisper through the cracks. At first, it shows up subtly, in a song that reminds them of shared laughter, in a memory that surfaces when they least expect it. They try to dismiss it, but the thoughts keep returning, each one sharper than the last. They start to remember the warmth in that person's voice, the small acts of care, the patience that was once taken for granted. And that's when the awareness begins to sink in. They realize that what they called space was actually avoidance. What they labeled as boundaries were often just walls. They see now that the person they pushed away wasn't trying to control them, but to love them. And that's when regret begins to take shape. Not as a passing sadness, but as a heavy truth they can't escape. For avoidance, regret is particularly painful because it comes with self-awareness. They begin to see how their fear of intimacy dictated their behavior, how they mistook emotional safety for independence, how they withheld affection to protect themselves, not realizing it only made the other person feel unwanted. They remember the moments when love reached out to them, a comforting touch, a gentle word, an invitation to open up, and they remember how they pulled away, convincing themselves they didn't need it. Now they see those moments differently. They realized that love wasn't suffocating them. It was offering them healing. But awareness without the chance to repair what's been broken becomes its own kind of torment by the time they understand. The other person has often already moved on, exhausted from trying to break through walls that never came down. Regret for an avoidant isn't just about losing someone. It's about losing the opportunity to become the version of themselves they could have been if they had allowed love in. It's the realization that they were never being tested by their partner. They were being given chances to grow. And instead of growing, they retreated, they let their fear make the decisions, and now they're left with the quiet aftermath. A space once filled with warmth, now echoing with what-ifs. They begin to wonder how things might have been different if they had spoken honestly instead of shutting down, if they had reached out instead of retreating. Those thoughts don't leave easily. They become background noise, following them from one moment to the next. Avoidants often tell themselves that they're better alone, but regret challenges that belief. It forces them to confront the reality that isolation doesn't erase emotional need, it only buries it deeper. The awareness that comes too late teaches them that control doesn't protect from pain, it only delays it. And by the time they see this, the loss has already carved a space in their life that no distraction can fill. They may try to move forward, meet new people, start fresh, but something inside them remains stuck. The part that never got to say what needed to be said. The part that still remembers being loved for who they were, even when they couldn't return it properly. That's the silent suffering of regret. It's not loud or dramatic. It's quiet, persistent, and deeply personal. It's the kind of pain that doesn't demand attention but never truly leaves. Independence without intimacy isn't fulfillment. For avoidance, independence becomes a source of pride, almost an identity. They wear it like a badge of honor, believing that needing no one makes them strong. They are self-sufficient, capable, and in control of their emotions, or at least that's how it looks from the outside. They've spent years perfecting the art of self-containment, learning to rely only on themselves because relying on others once led to pain, disappointment, or rejection. They tell themselves that they don't need love, that connection is optional, that happiness comes from personal freedom. But what they don't realize is that independence, when used as a shield, eventually turns hollow. It stops being empowering and starts feeling empty. At first, their life after losing someone feels liberating. No emotional demands, no vulnerability, no one asking them to share what's going on inside. They can make their own choices, keep their space, and avoid the discomfort that intimacy often brings. It's peaceful, but it's also sterile. The absence of conflict feels good, but so does the absence of warmth. And as time goes on, the silence in their independence grows louder. They start to notice that no matter how productive, social, or successful they become, something always feels missing. They can fill their schedule, but not their soul. Because independence can satisfy the mind, but only intimacy nourishes the heart. True fulfillment doesn't come from isolation. It comes from connection. It's found in the small human moments. Being understood without needing to explain, feeling safe enough to be flawed, being loved not for perfection, but for presence, for avoidance. Those moments feel risky, even suffocating at times, but they are the very experiences that bring meaning to life. When they push intimacy away in the name of independence, they also push away belonging, comfort, and joy. They build a life that looks strong from the outside, but feels fragile on the inside, because strength without connection isn't resilience. It's loneliness disguised as control. The irony is that avoidants crave connection just as much as anyone else. They want love. They simply fear the cost of it. They've been conditioned to believe that closeness leads to loss, that needing someone makes them weak, that love inevitably hurts. So they choose independence not out of arrogance, but out of fear. They don't want to depend on anyone because dependence once meant disappointment. But what they fail to see is that healthy intimacy doesn't take away independence. It deepens it. Being emotionally connected doesn't mean losing yourself. It means expanding who you are. It means having the freedom to be seen and still be accepted. It means finding strength not just in solitude, but in shared vulnerability. As avoidants go through life without intimacy, they often experience a slow emotional numbness. They can function, even thrive, but their joy lacks depth. They may achieve professional success, maintain surface-level friendships, or enjoy casual encounters, but the deeper sense of connection, the feeling of being truly known, is missing. They start to confuse comfort with happiness and routine with peace. But eventually, even they begin to sense that something essential is absent. The independence that once felt like freedom now starts to feel like isolation. They begin to realize that solitude isn't the same as safety, and that being emotionally untouchable means being emotionally unseen. When they finally reflect on their relationships, they start to understand that intimacy was never their enemy. Fear was. The people who tried to love them weren't trying to control them. They were trying to reach them. Independence was supposed to be a tool for strength, not a barrier against love. Real strength is the ability to let someone in and still know you can stand on your own. It's being able to hold on to your individuality while sharing your heart. Avoidants eventually learn, often through loss, that independence without intimacy isn't freedom at all. It's an armor that keeps them alive, but never truly living. Healing requires vulnerability. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this truth feels almost unbearable. Vulnerability is the very thing they've spent years avoiding, equating it with danger, rejection, and loss of control. To them, opening up feels like stepping into a fire. Unpredictable and threatening, they've built their identity around being composed, self-reliant, and emotionally guarded. But what they don't realize is that the same armor they wear to protect themselves is also what keeps them wounded. Healing isn't found in distance or detachment. It begins the moment they allow themselves to feel, to admit, to be seen as they are without pretense or defense. When an avoidant loses someone who truly loved them, the first instinct is to retreat into logic. They analyze instead of feel. They create explanations to make sense of the loss, but they rarely touch the emotions underneath. That's because vulnerability demands honesty, and honesty brings discomfort. It means admitting they miss the person they pushed away, that they care more than they want to, that their independence sometimes feels like loneliness. It means acknowledging that the pain they're feeling isn't just about losing someone. It's about confronting a lifelong pattern of emotional avoidance. Vulnerability asks them to lower their guard and look at themselves without judgment. For avoidance, that is an act of courage far greater than pretending not to care. Healing is not a clean process. It's messy, raw, and unpredictable. Everything avoidants fear. It doesn't follow logic or timing. It requires sitting with emotions they've spent years trying to escape. It means letting sadness come without suppressing it, letting regret surface without deflecting it, and allowing the heart to ache without rushing to fix it. Vulnerability turns the focus inward, not to analyze, but to feel. It's in that space of openness that transformation begins. The pain stops being an enemy and starts becoming a teacher. Through it, they begin to understand that love, loss, and fear are not weaknesses. They're part of being human. And to heal, they must accept the very humanity they've tried to hide. Avoidants often believe that vulnerability will make them dependent, but the opposite is true. Real vulnerability builds strength. It connects them to others in a way that isolation never can. When they dare to share what they feel, even a little, they experience the relief that comes from being understood. The moment they admit, "I'm not as okay as I pretend to be," is the moment healing starts to breathe inside them. It's not about breaking down completely, but about being honest enough to let others see their truth. That kind of openness allows empathy to enter, and empathy has a way of softening even the hardest walls. As they begin to open up, they discover something surprising. Vulnerability doesn't destroy their independence. It enhances it. It allows them to be authentic, to connect deeply without losing themselves. The fear of being consumed by another person starts to fade, replaced by the realization that intimacy and individuality can coexist. They learn that healing doesn't mean depending entirely on someone else, but rather trusting themselves enough to share their emotions. It's about creating space where love can exist without fear, where connection feels like choice, not obligation. The path to healing for avoidance is not found in perfection or control, but in surrender, not the kind that means giving up, but the kind that means letting go. Letting go of the need to appear strong all the time, letting go of the belief that feelings make them weak, letting go of the past patterns that kept them safe but lonely. Vulnerability is the doorway to all of that. It's the bridge between isolation and intimacy, between self-protection and self-acceptance. And though it feels terrifying, it's also liberating. When they finally allow themselves to be vulnerable, they stop fighting their emotions and start healing from them. They begin to understand that love didn't break them. Hiding from it did. When an avoidant loses someone who truly loved them, it's easy to believe that silence, distance, and control are the safest ways to cope. But what they eventually learn, often through heartbreak, is that these defenses don't protect them from pain, they preserve it. Healing doesn't come from shutting down. It comes from opening up, from facing what hurts instead of running from it. Every wall they've built, every emotion they've buried, and every connection they've pushed away becomes a mirror reflecting what they still need to understand about themselves. Love has a way of revealing who we are beneath our fears. And though avoidance may suffer quietly, that suffering carries a message. It's never too late to soften. It's never too late to unlearn the belief that vulnerability is weakness. Because the truth is, being open, even when it hurts, is what makes us alive. It's what turns heartbreak into wisdom and regret into growth. Maybe the greatest form of strength isn't in being untouched by love, but in daring to love again, this time without hiding, to allow someone to see you, really see you, not as the perfect version you try to present, but as the imperfect human you truly are. That's where real connection begins. That's where freedom is found. So, to anyone who has ever lost someone because they couldn't let love in, remember, healing doesn't start when the pain ends. It starts when you stop pretending you don't feel it. Let the silence speak. Let the walls crack. Let love teach you what fear once tried to protect you from. Thank you for listening and for holding space for the truth that so many people live but rarely speak. May you find the courage to let love in, not because it's easy, but because it's worth it. Thank you and take care of your heart. It's stronger than you think.